We welcome you to our class today, the second of the day, and it's by Elder Tanner, entitled Should You Upgrade Your Computer? And we'll now turn the time over to him. We thank him for his time and preparation. It is a sacrifice, and we sincerely thank him for doing this on a weekly basis. And we'll turn the time over to him and let him share his screen with you.
Okay, well, thank you. And I'm glad to be here again for another class. We are going to talk about, should you upgrade your computer? There's a question that's been asked just before we started about transferring data and moving to a new computer, and I'll talk a little bit about that today too. Let's go into it. One of the biggest things that probably comes up every time I mention upgrading a computer to someone is they say, well, my old computer works fine. It's been working fine. I have no problem with it. And the problem, I guess, that this is, and I hope you understand when we get through with this, that this is kind of an illusion, because change goes on. Whether your computer still operates is not really the main consideration of whether you should or should not upgrade, because the fact that it continues to operate merely means that you are one of the fortunate who have not had your computer crash yet, or had it become obsolete to the point of not being able to run any of the software that's available. So there's some very stringent conditions that are imposed by time passing and technology increasing. And so I think it's important to discuss this topic, because in a genealogical atmosphere here, talking primarily from the Family History Library at Brigham Young University. So I think that genealogists are the people that should be most concerned about this, in the sense that they put a lot of time and effort into the programs they use and the information that they gather. And so I think they fall into the work category rather than the entertainment category of people who are using computers. So there's a lot of considerations, and I'll try to cover as many of them as I can. And here's a list of some. First of all, the types of things you might have to think through in deciding whether you're going to upgrade your computer. First of all, how valuable is your time? This is kind of the time equivalent of the work that you do, regardless of whether you receive compensation. You may not be paid to do what you do. You may not be paid to do your genealogy work. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who have a professional part of their genealogy. But the real question is, do you value your time? And one of the problems that occurs here is that if you lose your computer and the data that's on the computer, anything that you've put in, you either have to suffer the loss, or you have to begin the process of reconstructing and rebuilding and re-entering all of that information. So there's a kind of a hidden cost here. And the question is, when, for instance, people who own cars, and I'm going to kind of give two analogies here: cars and photographic equipment, cameras and cars. Those are going to be my two other things to talk about today. But the value thing is that if you really value what you're putting into your computer, if you're using it for a purpose that's important to you, then you need to put some kind of a value, monetary value on that. Is it worth the money it would take to keep the machine updated? This also depends on, I guess, a lot of other factors, on your outlook on your life, and whether or not you think it's, you're either too old to worry about it, or that it's not something that you're going to be concerned with. But that's all the different kinds of things that end up coming out. So if you're asking this, it's really a question of whether you're using it for work or mainly for play. And as I just said a moment ago, I consider people who are doing serious or consistent genealogy research to be working. That's a work, and that's work product. And it's the work that you do should and does have a value. So how much do you do on your computer? Do you do a lot of work on your computer? Do you use it like once a day to look at YouTube or to look at the news. What is the purpose you have for your computer? I'm at the other opposite extreme. There are lots of people in my category who are professionals who work on their computer all day long and every day. And that's the position that I'm in. So I value it very highly. So this is the perspective that's coming from someone who spends an inordinately large amount of time working on computers and producing information for my personal use and for things like this, being online, teaching classes and doing things that involve my computer. And the other is, do you consider your computer to be a luxury or a necessity? I live in Provo, Utah, in the United States. And I would say that very many of my neighbors, friends, and people who live right in my immediate vicinity here in Provo own a rather large number of what you would call outdoor participation equipment, from very large campers, pickup trucks, all-terrain vehicles, ATVs, boats, all of these kinds of things. Many of these cost enormously more money than computers. But still, whenever you are making those kinds of decisions, you're making that decision based on your own interests and what you value. So that's one of the things that happens. And then the ultimate question, of course, is what would happen if the computer you have right now just stopped working this minute, just instantly for some reason goes dark or goes poof, and you can no longer see it. What would happen to all the work that you've done? And how upset would you be that your computer had bitten the dust, so to speak? So we're going here with the idea that as the technology is developed, the old ways of using paper-based research for genealogy have changed. It's just the nature of our times. We're here using the vastly extensive international internet. We're using programs that are extremely sophisticated and weren't available even maybe 5 or 10 years ago, even less available back in that time period. The idea that we could communicate with thousands of people online at a time and talk to them directly is amazing, and is not something that most of us who are a little older grew up with. There was kind of that thing that we imagined we would be able to do. But because it's become that kind of a part of our lives, my wife and I spend time each week talking to our children and our grandchildren who live across the United States and in various places. And it's something that we just do not have physically the ability to go see them frequently. And yet every week we can get together and see each other and talk. And this has become a very regular part of our lives. And so these are the kinds of things that add value to a particular machine rather than just because it's there and it's something that you enjoy having. One thing that we do need to understand is that a computer is a system. It's not just one box or one item. There are a number of things that go with a computer that create the type of thing that we're doing. So for example, here, and this is relatively common, but a little bit sophisticated level, is I'm using an external microphone to record these classes. I also am using my AirPods, which are my earphone type things to listen Bluetooth to my computer and to talk back and forth. I'm using various other items that are connected here, my hard drives, my tracking pad, all of the different things. And I have a second monitor, a big screen that's exactly the same size as my main screen. And they're side by side here so that I can have programs up over off here that you can't see, and then I can see programs here too. And that helps me to be able to have multiple things going while I'm making and developing classes and spending the time that I do to prepare. So this is, understanding this is that the computer is the major component of this system. Now, many people are moving to smartphones and iPads, and I have tried some of the more sophisticated iPad type or tablet type computers and thinking they might be a substitute for my laptop computer that I have for transportation to do research or to use for a variety of purposes while I'm traveling, for example. But as yet, I still feel that computers, because of the keyboard and because of the way that they store information and access the network, are superior to those other products. They're helpful. They may be a substitute at some level, but they aren't actually doing what I need to have done. The other part of this is it's not just the computer. The computer is part of all this technology. And the main component of this is the software. And part of that, meaning that whatever the programs, what you see on the computer is the results of people writing these extensive programs that run the computer. First of all, they're called an operating system. The operating system, there's two major operating systems out there. There are a few others that are used more by technical and commercial operations, but there's PC or Microsoft Windows operating system and the Apple OS X or Apple operating system. And between those, basically, they're depending on which computers you purchase. If you buy an Apple computer, you get Apple operating system. If you buy a Windows PC, at whatever level, you'll probably end up with some version of Microsoft's operating system. And this particular problem is that there's an interrelationship between all of the components. So each year, and we'll get into that a little more, but each year, as they upgrade each portion of that, then it affects, and the new developments that affect computer technology drive not only just the upgrades of computers and making them faster and with greater storage capacity and all of that, but that also, it just keeps rolling, because the more the computers change, then the more the software changes, and the software then pushes more advanced computer implications. So probably the simplest explanation of this is that many, many years ago, computer technicians visualized the idea that you could actually create images on a computer. That was when there was these big mainframe computers like the old IBMs and others. And that idea that you could do graphics on a computer actually drove the development of the computer industry, because people looked at that as being something they would like to do. And so as they realized that these images were going to take faster computer, some of you who have been around as long as I have can remember that when you pulled up a graphic in the old days, it would go across the screen and fill up the screen slowly. And that was kind of becoming unacceptable. And so people began to develop faster and faster computers. And then the faster computers enabled them to do more graphics. And then finally, at one point in time, they added all of the audio to that. And I can remember being in front of a new Apple computer that had just come into our store when I was operating an Apple dealership. And we put in one of the demos, and the demo was playing a familiar classical music piece. And it was just, everyone just had to come and just stare at the computer while it played this. It was just amazing. Well, of course, since that time, we've gotten things like compact discs and then DVD discs, and now we have full range screening of movies, and they're being produced simply to be able to be distributed on computers. They're not even worried about whether or not they can go to a movie theater. They'll put them out directly out to computer users. So that whole thing has happened, and we have no way of knowing what will happen in the future and what kinds of changes might occur in the future. Now we're going to get into the real issue about the machines is the product of the changes in technology and the actual reliability and usability of the equipment which is far secondary to the fact that when the software begins changing, the operating systems begin changing, that the older computers simply do not work anymore. They just aren't, they're not a viable product. You could keep running your old programs on your old computer, but the issue there becomes, what do you do with the data? What do you do with the things you're producing? What happens to all that information? And that becomes a tremendous problem. And I'm going to talk about a little bit of a story that happens with that. But here's the reality. Apple considers what they call vintage products. And a product that's vintage to Apple now is one that stopped being distributed or for sale more than 5 and less than 7 years ago. So there's this kind of 2-year window where they call them vintage products. They still support them to some extent, but they're on their way out. And then Apple obsolete products are obsolete when Apple stopped distributing them for sale more than 7 years. So 7 years is kind of the graveyard of the computer industry, because after 7 years, the computers are considered to be basically not worth anything, have no value. Now, they may have some intrinsic value, and an old Apple II like this one here could probably sell for many, probably thousands of dollars, maybe very surprisingly amounts of money. Then they become collector's items. They have no intrinsic use for doing work on the computer, but they have now become historical artifacts. So when we move onward, of course, Microsoft is not in any different situation, because they have a long, long list of discontinued products. And just keeping up with the number of products that are discontinued by either Apple or Microsoft is a problem. Here's a website out there called the Virgin Museum. It's a history of all of Microsoft's long list of discontinued products. So if you want to get in and see what all of those old products were and when they stopped being supported and when they disappeared off the usable horizon, then they are listed here. So if we generalize that based on Apple and Microsoft obsolescence, that occurs between 5 and 6 years from the beginning date of production. And so what we need to understand is that the computer operating systems change regardless of the hardware, regardless of your computer itself and the chips and all the stuff that's inside your box or your monitor in the case of an Apple iMac or some of the other products. Whatever's inside that computer is static. There's no way physically to update that. So there's nothing in there that can be updated. The operating system, the programs that run the computer are updated about once a year. Depending on the cycle that they're in, Microsoft and Apple both announce their upgrades every so often. Now, there are minor upgrades which occur because of their correcting, let's say, bugs in their system or security issues or all other issues that could happen. So they might have incremental upgrades that happen more frequently. So what happens when you get an upgrade, you get a notice from Apple or from Microsoft that says upgrade available, 15.1 or 15.015 or something like that. The main number is the main upgrade. The secondary numbers show degree of minor upgrades. So the further out the decimal points, the further out, the less serious those upgrades are. So you could be with what I understand to be the vast majority of people who just ignore that, and they don't even do anything, and they just wait and go ahead with their using the computer, and they don't want to sit there for even 5 minutes or an hour or even more longer to have the whole computer updated. And so they just put it off. And so you might be behind 1 or 2 or even 3 or even more than that, maybe a dozen upgrades on your computer. Well, as that happens over time, what it really says is that your computer becomes more and more vulnerable to some kind of loss of data, attack by an external, some kind of external problem with computers that like out the viruses and Trojan horses and all the different stuff that's out there. It might get more and more vulnerable to all those things. So the time is a major factor. Time passes, the upgrades happen. It's part of the whole system. There's nothing anybody can do about it because it's being driven by a technology that is still evolving and will continue to evolve as long as there are human beings still involved. Now, to compare, the average Americans keep their cars for 11.8 years. You may think that's not true. If you think about it, I've kept cars for as little as less than a year. I've kept cars for as long as 15 years. So if you average everybody out, then the numbers that they say online are 11.8 years for a car. Now, what's the problem with a car? The car problem is that computers are not cars. Cars do not change their fuel source every year. If cars change their fuel source every year, everybody would have to buy a new car every year because the engine is all run on just one kind of fuel, whether it's an electrical car, whether it's a gas or a diesel or whatever it is, it runs on that type of fuel. And if they change those fuel sources every single year, then we'd all be buying new cars every year. Well, obviously that's never going to happen because of the numbers of vehicles that are out there. Now, the difference is there's lots and lots of computers out there, but in a sense, their fuel source, the thing that drives them, which is the operating systems, change every year. So they're not the same thing as cars. And so what are they? Well, the question is very simple. Computers are not durable products, although they fall in the price category of something that's not like a throwaway. It's not something that you buy every day and then you throw away what you have left, like a milk carton or the wrapping on these particular apples and fruit that are sitting here in this picture. You buy that apple, but you throw away all the packaging material. So that just becomes a throwaway. Now, if you're a hoarder, of course, you may be stacking all this stuff up, but that's a whole different other problem. But it's not the same thing like a durable product as a car, and then you're intended to let those cars run for a considerable period of time. You want them to run as long as you can. And if you do buy a new car, it's usually a major change in your life and you're spending a great deal of money. I mean, the average vehicle now in the United States is cost somewhere north of $35,000, which is an extraordinary amount. It's nearly double what I paid for my first home. So, they're just amazing. But you get a car like this one, and I'm showing on the left, which is a Rolls Royce, and you may never sell that car. You may keep it forever because it's a durable product, and that car will only increase in value over time. Most of the cars decrease in value, but some of them increase. And so people know that, and they'll buy a more expensive car because they know that it will increase in value. So, but the computer, believe me, is never going to increase in value. It's just not going to happen. It's not that kind of a product. It is actually something that you use, and in a sense, you use up, because after you've used it for a period of time, the value of that machine has decreased. Not just, it may not decrease to you perceptibly, but it decreases exponentially because every year the changes make the computer even less able to operate in the new environment. And suddenly you discover that you buy a software and you start looking at a software product and it says, will only run with an operating system of, for example, an Apple 10.4 and newer. So OS 10 and newer. And Apple has names like Monterey and all that sort of stuff for each of their operating systems. So it says, it'll tell you that you can't run this software on any computer that's older than a Monterey running software. But see, that's the catch, because when they say that it won't run this software product will not run on your computer because you haven't upgraded your operating system, or because your computer is no longer capable of upgrading that operating system, then that's where you start to see the obsolescence. That's apart from the fact that they generally fail within that period of time. So you should use Google search to find the year of manufacture. You need to know the model and the serial number, which sometimes appears somewhere on your computer on a plaque or whatever. And if you want to know it on the operating system, and in both Macintosh operating system and on PC systems, you can go up into the system and look about your computer, and it will usually tell you the series, the day, the year it was manufactured, and the current operating system and all of that information. So as long as you're aware of that and aware of how to do that, but you may need to do a search on your particular computer model to see how to do it or where it's located. Okay, so what would you do if you were buying a product? If you went into the store, let's say you're like the normal people like we are when we go to the grocery store to buy food or a product, and you saw this on the label. Some of us, I'm sure, are just oblivious and we buy, or we just pull it off the shelves and we don't care. But if you're in our family, you're probably so used to it that you don't even realize it, that every time you pick up something, you look to see what the expiration date is, best if used by. Now, best of use by doesn't mean that the product's going to all of a sudden cease to be edible on that date. It's just saying that after that date, there is a process of degradation of the product that may not make it as good tasting. Maybe the taste changes. Maybe at some point it gets to be not even usable. Okay, so what if it said 13 August and this was 2022? Would you buy that product if you were buying it in December? So just kind of think about that. Think about it. It's December and you picked up a product, it's on the shelf, and you think it's been there for like almost 4 or 5 months on the shelf. Man, I wonder if it's any good. Okay, so really that's kind of a regular issue that we deal with. And it's really my opinion that computers should come with an expiration date. They should actually, when they're I think they sell them a little bit, not just a little bit, but there's a lot of hype, and to some extent they fail to advise you about certain things. And I think it's probable that at some point in time the computers will come with some kind of a disclaimer that says, be aware that this product will only be viable for the next 4 or 5 years or 6 years or whatever. So I think that should be coming, but it probably won't, because it's not really in the interest of computer people to let you know that. And this is the bottom line: the possibility of losing your data, losing everything you have on your computer, everything, having it just go dead. And the question is, well, yeah, you could pay to someone, get the hard drive out, send it to a service, and maybe they could pull some information off of that hard drive. The answer to is, yeah, your car stops out in the middle of the desert, and yes, you could hire somebody to come out and pull your car back into the service station and all the hassle and everything. But that's exactly what happens with the computers, is that it's not something that could happen. If you use a computer as long as I have since the very beginning, I can now look at the computer screen and I can see evidences that A, my hard drives are going bad, and B, that the computer itself is starting to function improperly. Now, for many years, my purchase of new computers was driven by the fact that I was always using software that pushed the frontier of what was happening. I was always trying to do movies. I was always trying to do heavy into photography, heavy into anything having to do with real technical graphics. And so because of that, I was always pushing to get a faster computer. Now, basically, when we get to the point of today, if I were to go out and purchase a new computer today, anything that I purchased would be incrementally faster than what I have. It would be faster, it would have more memory, it would have more capabilities. But the problem is that as far as the difference between the changes back 20 years ago when computers were coming, or 30 or 40 years ago when computers were working, were tremendous to each upgrade. Now that change has decreased. And so today it's only incremental. And recently Apple, for example, came out with a new iPhone 14 Pro Max. And if you have an iPhone 13 Pro Max, like I do, then you think, well, do I need to upgrade to the 14? The answer is, it depends on where you put your values. It depends on how you use the product. It depends on whether or not the increase is significant enough to make you really want to expend an additional amount of money to do that. So realistically, we have to remember that we still have people coming to us with floppy disks to resurrect. Literally, it's slowed down the last couple of years because of the pandemic, and we didn't have a lot of people coming in. And it may be that we've finally run through the pile of old floppy disks out there. But the floppy disk technology was an amazing technology at the time, because you had this little thing that could record information and put it into your computer and you'd be there. The problem, of course, is that the technology kept developing and developing and developing. And now we have external hard drives and solid state drives and things that store information. And then we have all these, but we still have people who are pulling us in these things. Now, it is possible. Let me just mention, you can buy a device, a floppy disk drive, who will take these 3.5-inch floppies, and it will plug into your USB port or your port on the back on your computer. But that's not the problem. The problem is when you put the disk in the computer, in that floppy disk, there's nothing in your computer that will recognize the information that's on that disk. Nothing. And to pull it off, unless it's just a pure text file. Now, in genealogy, we have kind of a window there because we've been using a program for years called GEDCOM, GEDCOM, Genealogical Data Communications Program from Family Search, that basically allows us to store all of the genealogical information in text format. It's being actually just like typing a letter in Microsoft Word or in any other word processing. It's a word processing program that stores all that data. Now, so if it's on your disk, there's very high probability that we can read those old GEDCOM files, but we still may not be able to get the information because GEDCOM is now changing, and we're now into a new version of GEDCOM, which, by the way, is GEDCOM version 7, which is going to be modified not too distant future, probably to 7.1. So even if we were able in the past to pull those in, we may not be able to read that. Now, GEDCOM 7 is going to be backwardly compatible so that it will read older GEDCOM files. But the reason that it's changing is because all of the programs have changed. The original PATH, personal ancestral file program that was on floppy disks, would only store a part of the information. For example, it did not store sources as separate items for information, which was, as far as we're concerned, really a poor difficulty with the program. But it did exist and it did have some information. It is still possible to capture that information, but it is a process and it's going to be difficult for you to find somebody who has that information. Now, if you had enough, you might be worth your time to buy a disk and try and do it. But it's unlikely also from the standpoint of the technology that if you have an old floppy disk, that the information is not already readily available on one of the major websites like Family Search or Ancestry or MyHeritage or Find My Past. It's very unlikely that the people that you researched 30 and 40 years ago have not been added already to all of those or some of those programs. Okay, so, and as I mentioned at the beginning, the computer is a system. And if you look at this little summary of the various mice or mouses or whatever you want to call them, pointing devices that were created. I can clearly say that, with the exception of maybe the one in 1998, that I have used every single one of those. And currently I'm using an upgrade from the Magic Trackpad, which was developed in 2010. So my pointing device is no longer a mouse. I use a trackpad. Okay, so let's kind of jump ahead. Now, this is another problem that occurs. And for about 11 years, as we ran an Apple dealership, one of the things that we would see is people would come in from a smoking environment. Of course, smoking has declined dramatically in the United States, but it's still there. And the computer is a highly charged static device. They have a very high charge in there, electrical charge. And they also have a fan. So they pull in air from the outside and it goes through the computer where there's all this electrical charging. And guess what? It's just like an air purifier. It soaks in all of the smoke and all of the pollution from your atmosphere. So if you live in a highly polluted area with smoke, like if you have someone who lives with you who smokes cigarettes, then your computer is going to look like a mass of black tar inside. We could tell immediately when we opened up a computer. They'd bring them in because they were broken, and we'd open it up and the inside of it was just caked with black tar. Oh, somebody in your environment smokes, huh? Yeah, well, by the way, your computer is dead and we're not going to be able to do much with it. So even if you think in terms of a 6-year cycle, it depends very heavily on the environment. So that's another thing. Now, what do we do when you have to change a computer or a hard drive? That's something that has happened to me regularly over the years because things do go bad and drop off. The second that I suspect that the device may not be operating properly because it makes a noise, or because it doesn't boot up fast, or because, for whatever reason, because of my experience, I can usually tell if it's a software problem or a hardware problem. And if it's a software problem, it may mean that you need to take everything off the computer and clean it all up and reinstall the operating system and get rid of all of this junk, the cumulative junk. Now, there are programs out there that will help you to clean your machines. And those programs help you to avoid that kind of a problem. But if the item, like a hard drive, is just physically going bad, you're going to have to transfer all the information off of that by plugging it into a computer with another hard drive. You've just plugged 2 hard drives into your computer at the same time. I have 6 on mine, so you can tell that's possible. And you may need to buy a device, a little thing called a USB splitter that gives you a bunch of different USB ports to plug in. And then you set up your new drive, and then just copy everything over to from the old drive. And then the old drive is gone. If you're me, then you already have a number of backups, so you don't really lose any significant amount of information because everything is going on to a disk for backups. But that process, how long that takes, depends on how much information you have. I'm using my basic drive right at the moment is an 8 terabyte drive, but I have 10 terabyte drives, and I have 8 terabyte drives that are almost full. Even at the high speeds of today's transfer, if I have to back up an entire 8 terabyte drive, it can take anywhere from 3 to 5 days of constantly running the backup on my computer. So you can see that this is something that's a serious thing. If I lost a whole drive and that was my only computer, there would be no way I could ever restore 8 terabytes of information. So that's the problem that we're running into. And important to understand that all programs and websites will change with each new computer operating system update. So when Apple or Microsoft implements a new upgrade, even if it's just a 0.1 or 0.2 upgrade to their operating system, every single software program will have to be updated. And essentially they stop working. So let me just keep going here. So it's just a constant activity of keeping up to date. Now, if you are online with your programs, like I have Adobe programs, and they're all now online. So I have a program from Adobe that's called the Creative Cloud, and we can have a number of Adobe programs. Before, we would have to purchase each program and update each program every year, and it was costing us thousands of dollars because that's the business we were in, was a graphic business, and we needed the computers. But as that changed, they now sell the whole thing as a package, and so we pay one cost to upgrade all our programs. But most all the programs are moving out of being sold in a box and moving into being sold online. And they're also moving to being basically a subscription service where you're paying monthly or whatever for the program, renting it in a sense. But the good news is that when you do that, then you get all the updates free. So it may be an annual fee, it may be a monthly fee, whatever it is, it's part of, in our condition, it's part of the cost of our doing our business. Okay, so always think in terms of what you need, not what you want. I mean, you may want a new big, huge computer screen, but you may not need it. You're not necessarily going to need that. And just for interest's sake, money is always the main issue. You have to value having a safe, up-to-date computer. If you don't value that, you're not going to listen to me or anyone else. You're going to find a reason why you don't think it's a good idea to upgrade your computer. By the way, you can add a big monitor, even 2 monitors, to a laptop today. So if you buy a laptop, you can add 2 big monitors to it. So your initial cost of your computer might be far less than you're imagining it to be. In addition to that, these are the descriptions. This is the description of a computer that you can pick up off of any number of different computer developer manufacturers. This is the newest 14-inch hard drive, 14-inch hard drive laptop, lightweight, 8 gigabytes of RAM, and all the specifications here. And the total price of that today on Amazon is $399. So when you start to think about upgrading a computer, it isn't like you're going to have to take your life savings and do that. And now $399 may be more money than you can possibly spend. But then again, it's a matter of priorities and where you put your values. Obviously, the upper limit of what you can spend on computers is not measurable. You could buy an Intel Core i9 computer with all these different things for $6,500, or you could spend on the top line Macintosh Pro computer with all of the possible memory and all the possible additional cores in it, well north of $10,000, sometime up to close to $15,000 when you put in the monitor and everything else. So yeah, there's really no upper limit, but you have to understand that a brand new computer that will work and help you with all the programs you need and all the updates and the problems is not nearly into that category. Okay, so what should you do if you want to keep your old computer? This is the problem. This is a software program story. I'm going to tell it real quick here. I used an Apple computer in my early days, starting with an Apple II, and I used a program from Apple called MacWrite, and it was one of the early word processing programs where you could type on the computer, see the words, and make changes. It was like the greatest dream of my life because I cannot handwrite very well, and I was always very, very slow, and I made a tremendous amount of mistakes, and so being able to write on a computer to me was the only thing that saved me from not ever wanting to write anything. And I kept a journal, a weekly journal, not every day, but every week. And started that back in 1973 and 4. It really got started in 76. And then in 77, since 77, I have been writing every week since 1977. Well, this is a lot of information because been typing into my journal for years and years and years. Well, I wrote it first in MacWrite, and then I just was saving it off on the disks and keeping it. And suddenly, about 12 years ago, I decided I'd better go back and pull in all of those old MacWrite documents. Well, guess what? None of them were recognized by any program on my computer. Not one thing that I could find or buy or do anything would recognize and open up an old MacWrite file. That was the technology. I had lost all of those years of my journal. How did I solve that? My brother, who was in business with us at the time in our graphic design business, we basically didn't know what to do with our old computers, so we piled them all up in the back room of our office. So we had an office piled up with old computers. So he dug into the old pile and found out an old computer that was still running, that still ran MacWrite and still took the disks. And so he copied it into a text file, which is a generic file. And then I was able to resurrect all of those documents. And so I thought, oh, I'm going to use Microsoft Word. So I used Microsoft Word for my files. And then I one day stuck a disk in to consolidate all my journals into one big long list of journals. And I guess found out that Microsoft didn't recognize the old Microsoft Word files anymore. And the only way I could do it was the same way that I did it originally, but I used a program that wrote text that was still able to recognize the old Microsoft Word files. And I transferred all of that data into text files. And now I periodically go through, and I've finally learned my lesson to go through and keep upgrading and updating even my old journal files. So I check on them periodically to see if they'll open and make sure that they're in the latest version. Because if I open them up in the latest version program and then resave it when I open it, then it puts it into the new version. So it's kind of simple to do that, but it's something that happens. Now that's the kind of thing that continually happens. And it's not even a surprise anymore. But if you really decide that you're going to keep your old computer for another year or so, please spend the time to back up everything you want to preserve. Absolutely back it up.
James, somebody was just asking about a handout.
Oh, well, we do the usual thing on a handout. What we do is I download this whole presentation in a PDF file, and we put those onto our archive on the BYU Family History Library. Anything else? Any other questions that's come up?
Are some new computers better than others?
Yes. You're talking to a person who buys the absolute fastest and the largest capacity computer that I can possibly afford every single time, because then I at least go maybe an extra year or two before I have to upgrade my computer. So it's kind of, I put in a few dollars at the beginning and I save it at the end. But inevitably, I'm still paying to get the next one. It's past being even a bother for me. It's just a normal part of my life. The computer that I'm staring at right now is about 2.5 or 3 years old. I realized that in the next couple of years, watching how the computers have been changing, that I'll have to upgrade it. And that's life. I'll be upgrading it. What'll I do with the old one? Probably give it to one of my kids or grandkids, whoever wants it.
There's a couple of questions that just appeared, Elder Tanner. Okay. Would you go to a computer store? I'm totally unfamiliar with how to transfer or even know what I need. And maybe they could contact you to talk about more detail.
Yeah, I think before you go to a computer store, telling you to go to computer stores like telling you to the car dealer to see if you need a new car or to an insurance salesman to see if you need insurance. The answer is, if they're there to sell you a computer, they're not going to tell you your new computer is perfectly adequate. But on the other hand, if you need third parties, you're more than welcome to tune into us, and we'd be glad to. I'd be glad to discuss it. You can tell me what you have, and I can tell you in about 10 seconds how fast, what I think of that particular level of computer.
And Beth is asking about transferring data from one old external to a new one.
Yeah, it's on the new ones. Most of the computers have a program built into them. You have to have some way to connect the old computer to the new computer. But if you're buying a PC or a Mac or an Apple computer, either one. The process is rather simple because when you plug it in, it asks you if you want to transfer information from an older computer. What we used primarily is a program on the Macintosh computers that's called it's a time machine backup, and it backups every last thing on your computer every hour or less. The same thing for Windows backup. There's a Windows backup program. Once everything's on that hard drive, that external hard drive, then you just plug the new computer in and they say, do you want to restore from a time machine or Windows backup? And then they'll just put everything back on the new computer. If you're doing it from a drive to a drive, that's just a simple matter of copying the data over to the new drive.
Yeah, they could just plug both externals into your computer and copy
copy
across.
from one to the other, just like two windows. You'll see the hard drive 1 and hard drive 2, and you just pull the file from hard drive 1 over to hard drive 2.
I've had this question sometimes about what do I do with my old hard drive and my old computers if I'm concerned about not having wiped them properly or concerned about that.
Yeah, I mean, there is a way of wiping old computers. That's a real problem. And how you get rid of it depends on where you live and whether or not they have a place for you to do electronic dumping. They have no real value. You know, there's places, for instance, you can go like Best Buy. Some of the big stores will take them, but you have to pay them like $5 to get them to take it. Don't throw them away into the garbage. That's not a good idea. They contain all sorts of chemicals and metals and compounds that are not good for anybody. Okay, thanks, folks. Hope it helped a little.